Mitch McConnell taking the reins of how this process goes.
I can't imagine that there isn't. They obviously had a big day today, signing the first phase of this China trade agreement. The president was feeling obviously very confident about all of that. The USMCA is also on deck to be passed as well, and that is a very big achievement for this president. There's no doubt about that. But he has said very clearly that he thinks impeachment is an ugly word, that he didn't want to be impeached, and Nancy Pelosi has tried to kind of, hammer that nail in by saying that no matter what happens with this process, the House of Representatives has impeached the president, and that is a forever sign around his neck, or an asterisk to his presidency. So my guess is that there has to be some consternation about whether or not you're going to see a moment when John Bolton primarily sits down at that table and gives his take on all of this.
Yeah. Martha, stand by if you would. Let's talk now with Harold Ford Jr., former Democratic congressman from Tennessee. Harold, your thoughts on this day. Republicans will say they're concerned that this opens the door to more partisan impeachments for other presidents down the road. Democrats say they're making a case that they think is open and shut.
I remember 20 years ago, Brett, I was in the Congress. I voted against impeaching President Clinton, and I remember the pageantry that we're about to watch, or that we're anticipating here in the next few minutes with Speaker Pelosi was in a different speaker in a different Congress. The Senate now has a responsibility. You have to hope that both Democrats and Republicans will take their pledge to be impartial in a very serious way. Although there's the foregone conclusion that he will be acquitted, I think all the jurors have to be willing to listen. But if you're on the political team of President Trump this evening, you think about how big of a moment this is from a positive standpoint. The jobs numbers, the economic numbers, the phase 1 of a China deal, the USMCA agreement, the incredible effort in Iran, the killing of this general. Any other president, any other person would be riding so high, but all of this news does put a damper here. As it goes to the Senate, Brett, I hope Democrats do one thing, that they focus solely on the national security implications of the president's actions. Whether he is convicted or not, I think going forward, if we're to take anything from this in terms of a history lesson, it would be that no president should take any actions that would undermine national security in an effort to advance their own political interests. Now, whether this president has done that or not, he's almost admitted to some of that. So whatever Democrats do and whatever the managers do, and I think Speaker Pelosi did a really good job at some of these choices for managers, including this young guy, Jason Crow, and Hakeem Jeffries, or these two young men, Jeffries and Crow, Crow being a former Army Ranger and intelligence analyst. They're uniquely equipped to do this. So this is an interesting, historic, and in a lot of ways unfortunate day for the country. But all these parties involved, House members now have done their part. The Senate now has a role to play, and I hope all Democrats and Republicans, take it seriously.
7 House managers, 13 House managers the last time for the Clinton impeachment. Stand by if you would. Andy McCarthy, former Assistant U.S. Attorney to the Southern District of New York. Andy, we spent a lot of time, the gavel-to-gavel coverage of the House as they built the case. That's how it's supposed to go. Democrats said that they had to rush through that urgently because the president was a threat to the election in 2020 by his actions. Now there was this pause for 27 days, and we're waiting for the formal move over for the articles of impeachment. Your thought?
Well, Brett, I think the delay obviously undermines the alleged urgency that was behind the effort in the first place. But my main concern, if I were Leader McConnell and the Republicans in the Senate, would be that this is not an open and shut case in the sense that the Democrats are saying it's shut. In fact, they are continuing their investigation, and as we've been discussing, they're throwing not only this new evidence, but the prospect of perhaps more impeachment articles, perhaps more witnesses who are just emerging coming forward. And my beef is that no federal judge would put up with a situation, a trial judge, where he was being asked to try a defendant in a case, and at the same time, the prosecutors were continuing in the grand jury to investigate the defendant on the same charges and broadcasting whatever evidence they find to the media, which of course would prejudice the trial. So I would certainly hope that McConnell will at least, and the Republicans will at least entertain the thought of suspending this without prejudice and telling the House, we're only going to try this case once, let's try it when it's ready. It doesn't appear to be ready.
Andy, what about this new evidence the Democrats, the House Intelligence Committee, sent over? It includes documents from Lev Parnas, the indicted associate of Rudy Giuliani, the president's lawyer, some communications, text messages. It seems like there's evidence that the ambassador, Yovanovitch, was being followed, tracked by some of these men. How does that factor in now? It obviously was not part of the case the House Democrats built in these various hearings, but now heads over to the Senate.
Yeah, well, it's always obviously been a problem, Brett, though, because there's clear factual overlap between the indicted charges in the Southern District of New York and the facts that were uncovered and the information that was uncovered in the House proceedings, to the point where a big part of the Southern District case is what happened with Marie Yovanovitch, the ambassador to Ukraine, and her removal at the behest of Rudy Giuliani and some of his associates. That was a big part of the House proceedings. It's a big part of the Southern District trial. The other wild card here is, I think it's pretty clear that Parnas is trying to leverage his potential importance as a witness in the impeachment trial in whatever plea negotiations he must be having with the Southern District of New York. He'd obviously want immunity, because if he testified in the impeachment case, that would convict him more than likely in the criminal proceeding. I worked in the Southern District of New York for 20 years. They don't give immunity. What they generally demand is that you have to plead guilty to the charges and give full cooperation. So that may take some time to work out.
You're looking live there. The articles of impeachment on the table. We're waiting for House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Andy, stand by. Cast of the Five standing by in New York. This is their hour on Fox News Channel. Let's hear from Dana Perino and Juan Williams. Dana, your thoughts first.
Well, I think that after this initial pomp and circumstance, everybody should just settle in, because it could be just a long time. We're talking about possibly 2 weeks. There won't be a lot of new information. I see that the speaker is probably getting ready here to appear. The senators can't really engage, and America feels like it's already heard all of this. They heard it a month ago. Public opinion did not change either way, and I think that when either side gets frustrated that the American people don't see it their way, they're missing the fact that if there was some big obvious case against the president, like, we would all know it. It would be really obvious. The fact that it's this muddled at this point and that people are dug in, I think that means that you're not going to see a lot of movement. Plus, I would also add this: you haven't yet seen the president's lawyers have a chance to lay out their case. It's an impressive group of people, and they will be up against many of the people in the House that we know, some that we don't. And so that might be worth tuning into.
Yeah, you're looking live at the Rayburn Room, by the way, in the House, and all the reporters getting up to take a look at the articles of impeachment. They're on the table, will be signed, and then walked over, as we mentioned, from the House to the Senate through the rotunda. Juan Williams, Republicans will say that the process in the House was faulty. They didn't have a chance to make a defense, a legitimate defense. As Dana points out, the president's attorneys and his team will in the Senate. Your thoughts today?
Well, they are going to have an extensive opportunity, and I think they've got quite a team there. Pat Cipollone, Jay Sekulow. I think Sekulow will be on TV most nights. I think he's TV able. And on the other side, I think when you look at people like Jerry Nadler, I think Nadler knows it, has the command of the case. But I think the star there is going to be Adam Schiff. And Schiff, again, I think is, you know, sort of TV ready. And I think so part of this is public sentiment and building public support. And on that point, Brett, I think it's important to note that people who were critical of Nancy Pelosi for the 27-day delay are now going to have to deal with the fact that there is, as you mentioned, new information continuing to come in, as well as the possibility of the former National Security Advisor John Bolton agreeing or responding to a subpoena to testify. So all of that means that we have a changing dynamic, and it puts pressure on this political process. This is not a criminal trial. This is a political process. And from Pelosi's point of view, it puts pressure on a lot of the sort of moderate Republicans who are in some political peril to come along and support the idea of witnesses and documents, and that this is an ongoing effort, not something that is to be viewed as static and having been already settled and discussed in terms of the existing articles of impeachment.
Chad Pergram, again, our congressional correspondent, announced today House Speaker Pelosi saying that she's appointing 7 House managers. As we take a look at those 7, some of them more familiar names from the process and the committee hearing process, including Adam Schiff and Jerry Nadler. But what about the others on here, and any surprises as far as who's been named to make this case in the Senate?
It's not a surprise that they picked a couple of freshmen, Sylvia Garcia of Texas and also Jason Crow of Colorado. You know, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is very aware of this big freshman class, the majority makers, those that, you know, propelled the Democrats to the majority. So she wants to respect that and just not have older members. That was one of the criticisms that the Democratic leadership had faced. And one of the criticisms about her leadership, you know, she had a bit of a rocky time last fall. Some people thought she might not have the votes to be the Speaker of the House. So this is going to be a very different group in that sense. I think it's notable that it isn't going to be Jerry Nadler, the chair of the Judiciary Committee, who will be the lead manager here. In 1999, it was Henry Hyde of Illinois, who was the chair of the Judiciary Committee, who led the effort against President Clinton. It's going to be Adam Schiff. And I should note that this is not Adam Schiff's first rodeo. He was the impeachment leader that Nancy Pelosi appointed him for a lower profile impeachment trial before the Senate in 2010. Thomas Porteous was a federal judge who was impeached, and that effort impressed House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and that's why, she put him in charge of the Intelligence Committee and now has asked him to lead the charge today. One other thing I should say, Brett, here is that the impeachment managers were all just told about 24 hours ago. They've been meeting in the basement of the Capitol, kind of plotting strategy, trying to figure out how they're going to go about this. If there's going to be 24 hours of debate and 7 managers, that's a lot of time that each of these managers would have as you subdivide their time presenting to the Senate.
Yeah, Martha McCallum, there's also the factor of the timing in the Senate trial. As these articles move over there, it starts this process, but we don't know how long this could go. Dana mentioned it could go a long time, and if witnesses are in fact called, and there you see Nancy Pelosi making her way to the Rayburn Room, it could be a big moment here, especially for some of those candidates who are on the campaign trail.
Absolutely. There's those senators who are running for the nomination have a lot at stake here in terms of the time frame and how much of that time gets eaten up by being in this trial. Then the other senators that we talked about before, Republican senators who are in precarious electoral positions going into 2020, it's been said, but it's worth reiterating that if Democrats sort of lose this round on impeaching the president, there's another big round here for them, and that is the potential of flipping the Senate, having it turn to a Democrat majority Senate, which would essentially, if the president does win re-election, tie his hands in the second term, Brett.
Yeah, as we look live at the Rayburn Room in the House, Nancy Pelosi surrounded by her committee chairs making their way into the room, packed with press. Again, the formal signing of the articles of impeachment. The House clerk will do that formally. There you see Adam Schiff, Jerry Nadler, and others. The Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi.
Good afternoon, my colleagues. As you know, on December 18th, the House of Representatives upheld its constitutional duty and voted articles of impeachment against the President of the United States, Donald Trump. He said in the course of the debate that he did not uphold his oath of office to protect, preserve, and defend the Constitution of the United States. The President takes a special oath, a little different from the congressional oath. In fact, he takes an oath that was taken by President George Washington, the patriarch of our country, in front of whose picture we stand here. So sad, so tragic for our country that the actions taken by the President to undermine our national security, to violate his oath of office, and to jeopardize the security of our elections, the integrity of our elections, has taken us to this place. So today, we will make history. When the managers walk down the hall, they will cross a threshold in history, delivering articles of impeachment against the President of the United States for abuse of power and obstruction of the House. As we make that history, we will be making progress for the American people, progress in support of our Constitution, progress in honor of the sacrifice and the vision of our founders, progress in honor of the sacrifice of our men and women in uniform, and progress for the future of our children. Make it be very clear that this president will be held accountable, that no one is above the law, and that no future president should ever entertain the idea that Article 2 says that he can do whatever he wants. And so with that, I will sign the resolution transmitting the articles of impeachment to the Senate, which will be delivered by our managers, of whom I'm very proud. When they bring this over, we'll set in motion a process on the Senate side. Probably tomorrow. I don't know their schedule, but it may be as soon as tomorrow. The senators will take an oath of office. They will take a special oath of office to do impartial justice according to the Constitution and the laws. Let's hope that they uphold that oath that they take tomorrow. And so now I'm very honored to be here with our 6 chairmen who worked so hard to help us uphold the Constitution with their legislating, their investigating, their litigating. You know, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee is part of the managers, Jerry Nather, Mr. Schiff, the distinguished chairman of the Intelligence Committee, House Select Committee on Intelligence, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, the chair of the Financial Services Committee, Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, Madam Chair of the Oversight Committee, Congressman, Mr. Chairman Elliot Engel of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and Richie Neal, Chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. We thank them for all of their difficult work, and we honor our darling Elijah Cummings, who said, when one day we were dancing with the angels, what would we say about what we did at this difficult time in our country's history? And then I'm very proud that Mr. Nadler and Mr. Schiff are part of our managers, but I want to acknowledge our other managers who are with us, a freshman member, but I shouldn't say freshmen. They've been here 1 year, accomplished great things. Congressman Jason Crow of Colorado. Where are we? Congresswoman Val Demings of the state of Florida. Congresswoman Garcia of Texas. Were we all here? Where's Hakeem? Hakeem, our distinguished chair of our caucus, Hakeem Jeffries of New York. Is that everybody? And Zoe Lofgren. This is Zoe's 3rd impeachment. She was for the Nixon impeachment, she was a staffer for a Judiciary Committee member, Don Edwards of California. She was a member of the Judiciary Committee on the Clinton impeachment, and in her own right, a member of the Judiciary Committee, and now a member of the Judiciary, chair of House Administration, which oversees elections, important to all of this, and a manager. So with that, I thank them all for their leadership and their service, and I'm now going to proceed to sign the articles.
Speaker Nancy Pelosi surrounded by 7 House impeachment managers that will make the case in the U.S. Senate in the trial, and 6 committee chairs who dealt with the committee hearings that led to the articles of impeachment, abuse of power of President Trump, and obstruction of the House. Speaker Pelosi now signing these articles of impeachment as they will make their way over formally. Bring back Dana Perino and Juan Williams. Dana, the House Speaker today said this is not political, this is not partisan, this is about patriotism. But frankly, it is political and it is partisan. And it's just the process that we've witnessed over the past weeks.
And I think one of the most partisan comments that she had made was happened over the weekend when she was on the Sunday show on ABC, in which she said that regardless of what happens in the Senate, being faced with the fact that we have already read the end of the book, we know that the president will be acquitted, and so now we're being forced to go back and read every single word for our punishment for having skipped ahead and read the end of the book. But she said the president has already been impeached, and he will have that for the rest of history, and if that was sort of like as if that was the goal. And I think right now what you're seeing is this ceremony, and it seems very somber, but that is very different from the House process, which was quite chaotic. And I think when it goes over to the Senate, people will see that Mitch McConnell will run a process, a trial that will be very senatorial. It will be calmer and more sterile, and it will be more slow than anybody wants. And we'll have to go through this because this got going back in September, or if you look at what the president has said, they have talked about impeaching him from the very beginning. The other thing I would say is that Senators Collins and Murkowski, the 2 Republican women who Senator Schumer basically is doing polling in their states to see if they're vulnerable in 2020. I do not think that those 2 women will be bullied into voting for witnesses unless they really think it's meritorious. But you'll start to see a lot more 2020 activity, including you'll see 3 of the senators who are on the debate stage last night for the Democrats. They will be in the Senate having to be jurors in this trial, and they're not allowed to say anything during that time. So it will be interesting, but I do think it will be a much calmer process than what you saw in the House.
Juan, what about that prospect? There's also Democrats up for re-election like Doug Jones in deep red Alabama who will have to make a decision as well.
I do think that this is a political process. I mean, I don't think there's any getting away from that, Brett. And the difference is the way that we frame it as Republicans and Democrats. Republicans clearly are intent on saying, oh, this is a partisan act. The president has said as much.
Let me listen in here for a second, Juan. Sorry. Okay, passing out the pens, getting it ready to walk over to the Senate side. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Not at all. I think while Republicans have sought to frame this, and the president sought to frame this as a partisan act, I think from what you just saw from Nancy Pelosi is her emphasis on the idea that there are people of conviction and principle standing up as patriots. I think that's why she spoke about the idea that this doesn't happen every day, that you have the Constitution, the Founding Fathers, the good people serving in our military, and our children all looking over our shoulders. That's a very different way to look at this. And I think that what she is saying is, and again, this comes back to what Dana was saying, that to both sides, we both know that this does not happen to every president. This is a real mark against a president, even if he or she is to be acquitted, and acquittal is likely. And finally, when she spoke of the Senate, she spoke of them taking an oath to do impartial justice, and she said she hoped they would uphold that oath. I think that's very strong language, and again, framing it in the sense of putting the pressure, the onus on Republicans to look at the evidence, to hear from witnesses, even the new evidence, as we've been discussing here on Fox, that's come out in the last 24 hours.
All right, Juan and Dana, thank you. We will head your way after this ceremony is completed. We'll toss it over to the 5. Thank you. Andy McCarthy, both sides, Republicans and Democrats, pointing to the founders and what they said about impeachment today. House Speaker Pelosi saying that the founders did not want a ruler, a king, and noted that. Republicans pointing to Federalist 65 and Hamilton, what he wrote about partisanship, and concern that this could be a process that happens again and again and again if it is just on a partisan basis. Thoughts on that as we watch this walkover from the House to the Senate?
Yeah, I think what's to be very concerned about with that, Brett, is that impeachment is a vital part of the Constitution. Madison thought it was indispensable, as he said during the debates over the Constitution, because it was necessary as kind of a final measure to wrestle or grapple on the congressional side with potential presidential excess or misconduct. And the problem with impeachment becoming politicized is not just the spectacle that we're seeing, but also the fact that it cheapens the impeachment remedy. So we may be heading into an era where we see impeachment much more regularly because it's now going to be used as a political weapon, but that also degrades it because no one will take it as seriously anymore as it's really meant to be taken. It's supposed to be really the nuclear option in our Constitution.
All right, Andy, stand by. You're looking live right here from the Capitol Rotunda, looking towards the House chamber. Those are the doors to the House chamber. And what you're going to see, this engrossment ceremony, it's not the best name for this. We'll bring in Chad Pergram. But it is the ceremony to take the actual articles of impeachment and walk them physically, which is part of the deal, over to the U.S. Senate. And Chad Pergram, we are going to see this pomp and circumstance from chamber to chamber here.
That's right. We're going to see it twice in the next couple of days. So what's going on right now behind the scenes by the Democratic cloakroom, which is kind of the dugout for the House floor, between the Rayburn room where they were actually conducting this ceremony, is Cheryl Johnson, who is the clerk of the House. She is actually putting pen to paper here. You might have seen House Speaker Nancy Pelosi signing her name, signing this message to the Senate with a series of pens. That's so all the committee chairs and also all the impeachment managers kind of have a souvenir that they would take with them. They do that when they enroll a bill and send it to the president. All the main sponsors get a pen. Well, the same case here. And you're looking toward the House doors. This is what we call the Will Rogers area. You often see us doing live shots or live interviews on our network and others with members of Congress. They will then walk that into Statuary Hall. Statuary Hall is the old House chamber. Then they will go past the Speaker's office. Paul Irving, the House Sergeant at Arms, he's in charge of security at the Capitol. He will escort Cheryl Johnson, the Clerk of the House, with that message in blue folders through the Capitol Rotunda. That's the middle of the building. Actually then past the old Senate chamber and then past the office of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. On the Senate side of the Capitol, they'll be met by Mike Stenger. He's the Senate Sergeant at Arms, and then they will actually take the articles of impeachment, or excuse me, take this message alerting the Senate what the House has done into the chamber. And I'm looking right now at the Senate floor. They are kind of in a posture, a holding pattern right now, waiting for the House to bring those over. Chuck Grassley is the president pro tem, the most senior member of the majority party, and he is presiding, waiting for this message to be received in the Senate. And then again tomorrow is when we do this all again, and the actual articles of impeachment plus the manager show up in the Senate in a very similar fashion, Brett.
Okay, getting ready to see this movement. People at home may say, why is this important? Well, it's only happened 3 times in the history of our country. Let's listen in. Not that there's much to hear, but let's listen in. Okay, that's Clerk of the House Cheryl Johnson and House Sergeant at Arms Paul Irving leading the way. Martha McCallum, your thoughts?
Well, you know, I'm just watching them walk through the rotunda here, Brett, and thinking about the fact that, you know, regardless of the fact that this is a really purely partisan exercise here, just based on the votes that we saw. In fact, it's bipartisan only in the fact that you had a couple of Republicans vote against what we're seeing play out here. But the rotunda is a place where, you know, you see so many important ceremonies over the course of history take place. It's Statuary Hall. It's where all of the statues of the Founding Fathers and other prominent Americans are. It's where we see funerals at times as we see people lie in state. So, you know, there is a lot of ceremony here and a lot of weight to what we're witnessing. And I was also struck by the fact that Nancy Pelosi said, we will make history and progress for the American people, which I think is an interesting choice of words in terms of progress. I think that Democrats look at this period and wonder if in the election process, people wonder what they accomplished in their time as a majority in the House. And she's characterizing this as progress, and we'll see if the American people agree as we enter this really sort of busy period heading into the primaries here of how the American public will really receive all of this.
Speaking of the American public, you can come up to Capitol Hill and make this same walk from the House to the Senate. There's places you can't go, but for the walk they're making with the Sergeant-at-Arms, you can do it. And also the impeachment managers following behind, Adam Schiff and Jerry Nadler leading the way of the impeachment managers. Let's bring in Harold Ford again, former Tennessee congressman. Politically, Harold, how do you think this falls as some of these polls are kind of upside down in swing states about how impeachment is going, how it's working for Democrats?
It doesn't look on the surface, as you look at some of the battleground state polling, that anything moved during the hearings before the committee, before the Schiff committee, and then before the Nadler committee. So it'll be interesting to see that now that this has moved, as Dana and Juan commented, to a different process, probably a more sterile and predictable and stale process when you consider how chaotic things were in the House. But I would remind everyone, there's no doubt this is a political exercise, because impeachment is. But the facts here are ones that are very serious ones. The allegations are very, very serious. The accusation is that the President of the United States called a foreign leader and asked that foreign leader for help in a political contest by investigating someone that might be running against him.
Let me interrupt you here, Harold. Hold on one second.
Of Donald John Trump, President of the United States.
The message will be received.
Senator Chuck Grassley is presiding. He is the President pro tem, the longest-serving member in the Senate.
President. The Majority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent that pursuant to Rule 1 of the Rules and Procedure and Practice, when sitting on impeachment trials, the Secretary of the Senate informed the House of Representatives that the Senate is ready to receive the managers appointed by the House for the purpose of exhibiting articles of impeachment against Donald John Trump, President of the United States, agreeably to the notice communicated to the Senate. Further, that at the hour of 12 noon on Thursday, January 16, 2020, the Senate will receive the managers on the part of the House of Representatives in order that they may present and exhibit the articles of impeachment against Donald John Trump, President of the United States.
Is there any objection? If not, so ordered.
I ask unanimous consent that pursuant to Rules 3 and 4 of the Rules of Procedure and Practice, when sitting on impeachment trials, that at the hour of 2 p.m. on Thursday, January 16, 2020, the Senate proceed to the consideration of the articles of impeachment, and that the presiding officer, through the Secretary of the Senate, notify the Chief Justice of the United States of the time and place fixed for consideration of the articles, and request his attendance as presiding officer pursuant to Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6 of the U.S. Constitution.
Is there any objection? So ordered.
I ask unanimous consent that the presiding officer be authorized to appoint a committee of senators, 2 upon the recommendation of the Majority Leader and 2 upon the recommendation of the Democratic Leader, to escort the Chief Justice into the Senate chamber. I further ask consent that the Secretary of the Senate be directed to notify the House of Representatives of the time and place fixed for the Senate to proceed upon the impeachment of Donald John Trump in the Senate chamber.
Is there any objection? If not, so ordered.
I ask unanimous consent that access to the Senate wing, the Senate floor, and the Senate chamber galleries during all of the proceedings involving the exhibition of consideration of the articles of impeachment against Donald John Trump, President of the United States, and all times that the Senate is sitting in trial with the Chief Justice of the United States presiding, be in accordance with the allocations and provisions I now send to the desk and I ask that it be printed in the record.
Is there objection? If not, so ordered.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of SRS 471 submitted earlier today.
The clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 471, authorizing the taking of a photograph in the chamber of the United States Senate.
Is there objection to proceeding to the consideration? Without objection, then the Senate will proceed.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection, so ordered.
Now, Mr. President, for the information of all senators, a few minutes ago the Senate was notified that the House of Representatives is finally ready to proceed with their articles of impeachment. So by unanimous consent, we have just laid some of the groundwork that will structure the next several days. We've officially invited the House managers to come to the Senate tomorrow at noon to exhibit their articles of impeachment. Then later tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m., the Chief Justice of the United States will arrive here in the Senate. He will be sworn in by the President pro tem, Senator Grassley. Then the Chief Justice will swear in all of us senators. We'll pledge to rise above the petty factionalism and do justice for our institutions, for our states, and for the nation. And then we will formally notify the White House of our pending trial and summon the President to answer the articles and send his counsel. So the trial will commence in earnest on Tuesday. But first, Mr. President, some important good news for the country. We anticipate the Senate will finish the USMCA tomorrow and send this landmark trade deal to President Trump for his signature. A major victory for the administration, but more importantly, for American families. So let me close with this. This is a difficult time for our country, but this is precisely the kind of time for which the framers created the Senate. I'm confident this body can rise above short-termism and factional fever and serve the long-term best interest of our nation. We can do this, and we must.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell formally accepting the articles of impeachment. The Senate now will start this process, a trial and rules of the trial that will be set starting tomorrow at noon. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, will be sworn in to preside over this trial, and the House managers will begin to make their case as of next week on Tuesday when this trial officially gets underway. The logistics, the pomp and circumstance of the articles being moved from the House to the Senate has been finished. No matter your ideology, no matter your political party, where you stand on any of this, this is history. It's only happened 3 times in our country, and we have you covered. Please stay tuned to Fox News Channel and this Fox station for continuing coverage of this story. In Washington, I'm Brett Baer. Now here on Fox News Channel, we'll continue.
This has been a Fox News Special Report.